Welcome to Aspen Leading Edge. I'm Patty Roberts from St. Mary's University School of Law. Today's guest is one of our law school deans. Alena Allen is the Pan American Life Insurance Company Endowed Professor of Law at Louisiana State University Law Center, where she is also the dean, a position she started on July 1st, 2023. So, Dean Allen, thank you for being with us and congratulations on completing your first 2 years of service as the dean of the LSU Paul Hebert Law Center. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Patty. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm delighted to catch up with you. The last time we spoke on a podcast, you were interim dean and professor of law at the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville. And so first I want to just start and say, how is it different being the dean of LSU law than it was being the interim dean at the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville?
Well, I think when you're interim dean, you're dean, but there's still this expectation that somebody else is coming. And so you're just treated differently. But when I became permanent dean here, everybody was like, we have this problem and can you please solve it? And so I think the stakes are a lot higher when you don't have the interim in front of the dean title, but it's also home for me. And I miss Fayetteville. I love Fayetteville. It's a wonderful community. The faculty is great, but my mom is going to be 80 on Sunday.
Oh, congratulations. Happy birthday, Mom.
I know. I can't believe my mom's going to be 80, but it feels so right to be home. And so the best thing about being dean of LSU is this is my home state. It's the flagship in my home state, and that's really special.
That is really special and really impressive and significant. And it's a really interesting time to be in higher education, legal education, leadership, period. So how have you found your transition since becoming permanent dean?
So there's a joke about the lack of stability in higher ed leadership. And it's not really a joking matter for me because when I was hired, President Tate was the president of LSU and the provost was Roy Haggerty. And neither are still with LSU. And it's only been 2 years. And so it's really hard to come into an institution and be inspired by leadership and then have that leadership leave. I still have a mission that I believe in at the Law Center. And so I'm still trying to execute on that mission every day. We really pride ourselves in giving an opportunity to first generation students. We pride ourselves on trying to educate lawyers who are committed to staying in the state and improving the state. And that mission energizes me, but it's disorienting to have sort of the leadership above you suddenly gone.
Well, I completely agree that can be disorienting but great that you're continuing to stick to your mission. We are a largely first generation institution here at St. Mary's. And boy, that's the work that really is the rewarding part, right? That's the part that makes it a difference every day when we come in. So as you've been navigating this transition, and now I assume you have interim leadership, what do you find the most challenging about being in this role and being kind of the experienced leader with less experienced leaders above you?
So the interim president was dean and vice president of ag, and the interim provost was formerly dean of a college. And so they both have higher ed administrative experience at LSU, but they're both new to their roles in a time of rapid change. The Trump administration has really dramatically changed higher ed. It hasn't even been a year yet, but it feels like it's been 10. And so the pace of change has been really dizzying. So I can only imagine the learning curve for them. From where I sit, I think the challenge is knowing that they are new to the role and wanting to give them grace, but also feeling like I need more guidance and guidance that they couldn't possibly be able to give because they don't know a lot. And so it's a lot of uncertainty for those who understand higher ed budgets. The Law Center is an RCM budget, which basically means that I get to keep my tuition dollars. So I probably have a little bit more control than other deans who aren't on an RCM budget model. And so it's been helpful that it's a really strong pool for this year's entering class. We expect to have about 230 incoming JD students. Our average LSAT right now is 158. That probably won't hold, but that's a great median for us.
That's fantastic.
I'm really excited about that. And so I think there are things that I can control that I'm looking forward to. I know when we meet as deans for dinner or at the conferences, there's always a debate between those that teach and those that don't. And I'm a dean that teaches. And so I teach 1Ls and I have about a third of the class. So last year I had 81 1Ls in torts and they really energized me. And so I'm really excited about this class to teach them. And as we talked about, sort of the student mission, helping students realize their dreams, helping them realize that they can make a difference. That's why we're here. And so being in the classroom for me is really, really important.
Well, I really admire you for continuing to teach. That's not easy to do. I have done it both teaching and not teaching, but not 80 students. So it's a lot. I do love first years, though. They certainly help us be inspired. As far as LSU's Law Center goes, for those who are listening, tell us why a student might choose LSU Law. What makes LSU Law special?
So we like to say we are an uncommon law school, and because we're the flagship in the state, we have to teach both civil and common law. So there are three other universities: Southern Historically Black College, Tulane, and Loyola, and they allow students to elect a track. So you can do only common law or you can do only civil law. But LSU is the only school in the country that actually forces every JD student to take some amount of common law classes. And so I think that's really unique. We just had curricular reform. So starting in 26-27, we're going to be teaching more classes in a comparative fashion. So property will be comparative, contracts will be comparative. We're going to really sort of dig into that comparative identity and help students hopefully make connections that they wouldn't make if they were only taking common law, and hopefully prepare them for an international practice if they so choose, because most jurisdictions are civil law jurisdictions.
That's a really interesting point. And when I had been talking to Dean Lendrow at Loyola, she had indicated that. I'd never thought about that before, but sure, the European countries are civil law countries. And so your students would be very well suited and educated for that. Do most of your students stay and practice in Louisiana?
It's usually upwards of 70%.
Well, I love that you're going to reform the curriculum so that it has a comparative aspect, and that really will give them the best of both worlds as they move forward. You talked about the mission of the law school and that you've spent the first 2 years kind of doing that problem solving that we all do as new deans in new places. What is your vision for the next 5 years for the Law Center? If you could wave a magic wand.
Wow, that's so hard, Patty, because it just seems like we're in such a period of uncertainty that it's really hard to feel like you can even plan for next week, let alone for X 5 years from now. Um, when I started, people would say, "So what's your vision?" And I would always say, "Well, it's really about being brilliant at the basics." And I would say it's the ABCs. It's access, and that access to me means access to a legal education and raising money for scholarships, as well as access to justice, meaning growing our clinics. And the B, of course, is bar passage, because if our students can't pass the bar, then they can't get a job and they can't practice. And C is curriculum. And so we've tackled the curriculum piece, and I had been looking forward to more international programming, right, leaning into that comparative. And I was in discussions to have an intercession in China and one in South America. And so I'm not sure how viable those are right now in this current environment. We have a summer program in Lyon that has existed for decades that we're really proud of. And we had about 21 students participate, but there was a lot of anxiety among students, especially students who had never been abroad before, thinking, is this the right time for me to go? I don't know. And so that's a question mark for me right now. I think leaning into lawyers as leaders is really important. I think we really are in a time where leaders, regardless of your political affiliation, are really, really important. And I think lawyers make excellent leaders. And so I think leaning into that identity is important. We're talking about making our professional identity curriculum more robust and having it spanned over the first year, because students are often younger. The 3+3 programs bring in students who are really young. One of my favorite students in torts last fall is 20. and she's amazing, but 20 is really young. And it's really helping students think of themselves as professionals and really finding meaning in their work, because part of the problem that we have as professionals with substance abuse is, I think, losing why we decided to become a lawyer in the first place. And so helping students maintain that focus, maintain their why, and develop real coping strategies that can follow them into practice, I think is really important.
So before you were a dean, you spent some time serving as deputy director for the Association of American Law Schools. And I'm wondering, where do you see the difference in your impact from having a title or a leadership position in a national organization impacting all law schools to focusing on a single law school?
So there is work that I did for AALS that I'm really proud of. I did the webinar for how to become a law professor. As you know, the pipeline and the pathway to becoming a law professor is often very narrow. And if you don't graduate from a top 14 law school, it can be hard to get information about how to be successful. And so one of the initiatives that I came up with was, let's try to improve the pipeline and give information to those who might be considering this path. And so I've continued to do that even as dean. But the nice thing about WLS was I got to get an overview of what was happening in legal academy generally. And so I sort of felt like I came into this position with a broad understanding of the key issues in legal education. But now the key issues are really my issues that I have to grapple with and I have to solve. And the ABA standards, like the 12 hours for experiential learning and what that means to me as an RCM and how we would actually effectuate that if we have to, is something that I grapple with. I obviously think that experiential education is really, really important, but I think 12 hours for every law student is a bit excessive. And so now I really do have to think about, well, what's the difference between best practices or maybe aspirational practices versus accreditation standards and how it really impacts me and my law school? And I think just being the face of an institution is really, really different than being the deputy director of a nonprofit, right? I represent the Law Center. I represent LSU. And I think there's a gravity that comes with that that just didn't compare to my role at WLS.
So you mentioned access not only to legal education, but also access to justice. And I share your view that those are twin really requirements for our profession to continue to lean into and intentionally address. But as far as access to justice goes, what role is LSU playing in with your law center in addressing access to justice issues?
So Rusty Stutes made a significant donation for a business law clinic. And so that came online this year. And its focus is really on small businesses and giving them the help that they need to be successful. And so we're really proud of that. We have an income tax clinic coming online this year. We hired an LSU grad, Cherish, to run it. And so we are excited about that. We also have a veterans law clinic, a mediation clinic, a juvenile justice clinic, a reentry clinic, and prosecutorial clinic. So we have a robust number of clinical programs, and students really find meaning, I think, in their clinical experiences. It's oftentimes when students aren't at the top of their class and they haven't made law review that sometimes they're sort of feeling like, why am I here? There's sort of a darkness that settles in after first year when you're not in that top 25%. And I think clinics are a really good way to bring students back to, again, their why. And it makes them realize that I can add value. I can make a difference in the lives of the clients. And so we've leaned into clinical education.
That's a lot of impressive clinics. I'm sure your students benefit, but even more so, I'm sure the community is benefiting greatly. You mentioned before the programming that you've done and that I know is still ongoing and helping to encourage people to enter the legal academy and the teaching profession. What kinds of advice do you give people who might be thinking about joining the legal academy? If you were talking to someone now who was listening who might be thinking about teaching in legal education, what kinds of things might you recommend?
So writing is really important if the goal is a traditional tenure track position. And I always tell candidates that when I started law teaching, it was the promise, it was scholarly potential. But I think now the expectation is that you will have written, if not one article, multiple articles. And the higher up the US News rankings you go, the more articles schools are looking for. But I also emphasize that now is a great time to join legal education because we have more pathways. And now clinicians, legal writing instructors, academic success professionals have long-term contracts at most schools. At LSU, it's 5 years, and it's a professor of professional practice track that does not have scholarship requirements, but does have a promotion pathway. So you start at assistant, promoted to associate, and promoted to full. And so I think there's a lot more room for people who say, hey, I'm not interested in scholarship, but I want to teach, to actually teach, feel valued, and make a difference within legal education.
Well, I hope that your efforts continue to be successful because I know that many, if not all, law schools across the country are looking for really talented, committed legal educators. And so I hope having these increased pathways, as we do at St. Mary's as well, will help us to diversify who is applying for law faculty positions and the kinds of positions that they apply for. So, in the coming year, what do you think is going to be the greatest challenge we will face as leaders in legal education?
If only I had a crystal ball, Patty. Like, I wish I had one. I think
You could say just about anything, though, and there are so many dumpster fires right now.
so. I can only speak for, I think, my faculty at LSU. And I think at the end of last academic year, I heard a lot of fear from my faculty. They were wondering, what can I say in the classroom? What can I not say? What topics can I discuss? What topics should I try to shy away from? How can I facilitate respectful discussions among students without having it implode? And so I think the biggest challenge is sort of leaning into educating students in this environment because I think fear, whether it's legitimate or not, it doesn't matter, right? The fact that faculty are afraid of teaching controversial subjects is really chilling. And so I think my challenge as dean of the Law Center here at LSU is really empowering faculty to really believe in academic freedom, to believe that it still exists, because I really do think it does, to believe that if you are talking about things germane to what you're teaching, whether that's con law, criminal law, I teach feminist jurisprudence, right? So to really lean into those concepts and to talk about things that might be uncomfortable because that's what students are paying for. And so I really think that the challenge is getting faculty to embrace that and to embrace their role as educators.
It's certainly understandable why there is fear, but you're right. Academic freedom still, at least according to deans and the leaders in higher education, is very much alive, and we need to practice it in order to keep it alive.
Yes.
Another area that we're having to address as we move forward with legal education is artificial intelligence and the role that that's going to play, not just in the academy, but also in the profession. Has LSU Law done anything to start figuring that whole topic out and how their students should be trained in it?
So we have had lots of debates about AI, and we have legal writing faculty who have taken divergent positions on the use of AI. So we have some who allow students to use it as long as they disclose how they use it. And for them, they believe that it's a tool that it's going to be used whether you say it can be used or not. So you might as well just incorporate it from day one. We have other legal writing faculty who believe strongly that it's important for students to learn the old school ways and to try to keep them from using it as a tool. I think there again, this is just a rapidly changing environment, and it's incumbent upon us to expose students to it. So I think it's important that we do integrate it. We have a law practice management course that talks about the use of AI for attorneys. We have a faculty member, Tracy Norton, who writes about generative AI. And so I suspect that we will be offering more courses about AI, but it's not just AI. It's like marijuana policy. It's defamation law in the age of social media, right? There are just so many fascinating changes to the law that it's hard to keep up.
That is an understatement. It's gonna be an interesting few years. I noticed that you've written, a book chapter in Integrating Doctrine and Diversity, Inclusion and Equity in the Law School Classroom, where you talk about fostering discussions about gender and racial bias in tort. Can you expand a little bit about that since you've been teaching first years and in torts and feminist jurisprudence is one of your specialty areas? How do you find the gender and racial bias to show itself in the tort field?
So I always teach damages where I have my students read a case about a Latino child who suffers from lead poisoning. And because the child is, I think, 2.5, might be 3, the question is, how do we extrapolate the lost earning potential? And so the judge in the case talks about, well, if the child had been a white child, that their earning potential would have been blah. But the fact that this is a Latino child, the earning potential is blah, and it's significantly less.
That's outrageous.
Right. But again, right, it's not outrageous, it's data, right? So if we look at what the average Latino males will earn over the course of his lifetime versus what the average white male, there's a disparity there, right? That's just data. And so it's interesting that whether students are conservative or liberal or anything in between, they are all horrified that a child could be valued differently because of their race. Like, right, they are just enraged about this. And I always tell them, okay, so if we are enraged about this and we don't want tort damages to be impacted by this, why do we accept this? Like, why do we accept that the Latino male actually is earning like 70 cents on the dollar? Like, why is that okay, but not okay when we talk about tort damages? And so I think it's important to sort of force students to think about those issues because they are uncomfortable. We all can agree that we don't want to value a child differently, but then why are Latinos making less than white males? Why are Black females making less than white males? And what can we do upstream to change that? And what responsibility do we have to change it?
I'm so glad you're having those discussions. What important discussions to have. And that leads into the difficulties of having these controversial discussions, right? And how do we deal with it? And how do we train lawyers as leaders so that they change the law later? They make sure there's equitization in salaries. Wow, that's very interesting. Well, in our final few minutes, what I always ask my guests to answer is another crystal ball question. And that is, what do you think the future of legal education will look like in the coming decade? How is it likely to change?
I mean, you've stumped me, Patty. I don't know. It's when I started law school, it was right when schools stopped using books to shepherdize cases.
Me too. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so that seemed like the brave new world for faculty then. Like, how can you, what do you mean you don't know how to shepherdize cases? Like, what do you mean you only know how to do it on Westlaw? And so I think AI is going to be like that. I mean, I think we will have some fundamental change, but at the same time, there's an amount of creativity that I just don't think AI will ever be able to capture. I think there's a need for human interaction when we think about family law in particular, right? The lawyer is so much more than just a lawyer in family law cases, and AI can't replace that. When we think about criminal law, the same thing. And so I think some things will change. I think a lot of boilerplate contracting and things will be done by AI. But I think the fundamental skills of legal analysis and being able to make arguments, that's going to endure. And so part of me says that the change might not be as dramatic as I think, because the skills that we're teaching now, I think, were the same skills that we were fundamentally teaching 100 years ago.
It's interesting that you bring up criminal law and family law. I certainly think you're right. These are places where you need emotional intelligence. You need some of that, not just attorney, but also counselor at law. I recently interviewed for the podcast one of the founders of Garfield AI, which is an entirely AI law firm in the UK. But what it does is basically like send demand letters and do the court documents for unpaid debts for mostly small businesses on the small business side. And you can see where that could be a great use of AI.
Right.
But that doing that sort of thing with a family law case, a custody matter, or
Right.
a criminal charge certainly would not be. So it'll be interesting to see how it evolves. But you're right, these are interesting times, and I don't know that any of us knows what's going to happen, as you said, next week or in the next 10 years.
We don't.
No.
We just need to buckle up for the ride.
That's exactly right. Well, thank you so much, Dean Allen, for sharing your first 2 years experience at LSU Paul M. Hebert Law Center on July 1st, 2023 to now. Congratulations on almost finishing those 2 years and going into your third year. And I appreciate your perspective and good luck.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Always a pleasure talking to you. And if you enjoyed my conversation with Dean Allen, I hope you listen to other thought leaders in the legal academy and find episodes of the Aspen Leading Edge podcast on your favorite podcast channels. Thank you.